Politics show. As we do most Tuesdays, check in with Jennifer Lawless, formerly of American University, now heading to the University of Virginia. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
We are well up here. The big news making the headlines today, the Supreme Court upholding Trump's travel ban. Was this expected?
It was one of those things where it depended on how Anthony Kennedy, the swing justice, was going to go. The decision was not unexpected to be 5-4. The question was, would it be 5-4 in support of the Trump administration or 5-4 in support of the circuit courts? And what we see here is a big victory for presidential power.
And so what's the fallout? Are we seeing the president sort of take a victory lap, if you will? Let's talk about the politics and the optics of it. Is he going to be taking this as a victory lap?
I hear it he is. I mean, the minute and a half comments that he offered regarding it right after the decision came down suggest that he believes he was right all along, that this was just a waste of a year and a half, and that the court ultimately sided with him. Now, the one thing that's really interesting here is it's clear that campaigns matter, because the fact that Neil Gorsuch was the deciding vote makes it very, very obvious that had Hillary Clinton won, not only wouldn't she have put this travel ban into effect, but we would not have had a justice that would have supported it. On the other hand, everything that Donald Trump said during the campaign that was anti-Muslim or anti-immigration was not held against him in the decision by the justices. Instead, this was a situation where they just looked at the policy, not his intent behind it. So in some ways, Trump was able to have his cake and eat it too.
And so let's talk moving forward. I mean, what are we seeing in the international community? Oftentimes you can get myopically focused here in the U.S. How is this perceived abroad?
I mean, I think it's perceived as quite limiting and anti-immigration, right? The sentiment that Donald Trump has been espousing for the last year and a half is now seen as something that's permissible for the U.S. president to espouse. And so we've known that presidents can generally play an important role in immigration policy, but here we now have firm evidence that constitutionally the president can decide who comes into and who leaves this country. And I think it reaffirms a lot of the concerns that some of our allies had about U.S. politics under a Trump administration.
And let's talk a little bit now about what we've seen since the issue of separating families at the border after the Trump administration said that they were looking to end that policy, reuniting families. What have we seen since then? Of course, we saw the visuals with the children being separated. Is there a sense that things have suddenly been rectified?
You know, I've got to say, I thought this one was going to have longer legs because the visuals and the audio was so compelling. And this was a situation where most people just felt like they were being, their heartstrings were being pulled when they heard the screaming and they heard the crying. And for the last 4 or 5 days, we've actually not heard about this anymore. That doesn't mean that any of these kids have actually been reunited with their parents or that any of these families are back together. But it was clear that the optics were bad enough for the administration that they were willing to say, okay, we can't do this anymore. But the fact remains that more than 2,000 kids remain separated from their parents, that the administration believes that that was an appropriate way to move forward. They just don't think that it was ultimately that politically savvy of them to do it. And we're no closer to a real solution than we were before all of this started. Now, Donald Trump's approval rating went down a little bit, but it's unclear if that was directly because of immigration or if it was just the ebbing of the North Korea bounce that he had received. So, this is just more evidence that he's sort of Teflon among 40% of the population.
And let's talk a little bit about the media's role in this and what we had seen sort of at the border. Let's talk, first of all, that picture of the little girl on the cover of Time magazine that apparently reports after the fact a father stepped forward, said never was separated. Was there some kind of concern about, how media did or didn't portray what had been taking place throughout this time?
Well, I think the media actually saved the day and ended this policy. And so this was one of these situations where they were able to say, look, we've been there. We've seen kids in cages. We're at this Walmart store, and it does not look like summer camp. We have no idea what these people are talking about. So I think it's important, really, to express the important role that the media played and highlight that they're the ones that are ultimately able to deliver a message to the American people and let the American people weigh in on whether what the administration is doing is right or wrong. By the same token, they played right into Trump's hand by not fully fact-checking who the little girl on the cover of Time Time magazine was, that became the epic photo and that became the iconic image. And it turns out that it's not representative of the policy that was being debunked. So I think that helps Trump say, look, there's this liberal media and they're willing to be out and get me. And that actually was fake news. And, you know, I don't think that the liberals or the media want to give Donald Trump ammunition like that. So it's really important to be careful moving forward.
We have to talk about the jacket. I know it was now several days ago now. Did you expect this out of the First Lady?
I've got to say, I was on a work trip in California and I was with a political scientist, and we're both political junkies and we're both obsessed with this issue, and we were both completely stunned and silent for 24 hours. Because no matter how you think about it, it doesn't make sense, right? First of all, the jacket was $40. She doesn't wear anything that costs $40. Second, she was doing something that sort of ran counter to what the administration wanted by going to the border to meet with these kids. And then she is wearing a jacket that suggests she doesn't want to be there and doesn't even care. And then her comment that, well, you don't have to read into everything. Well, not reading into it is even worse, because that's just a level of tone deafness that's beyond the pale. So I still don't understand what happened.
Well, I think there was the rationale that I don't really care, do you? We heard in some circles was directed at the media itself. But when you're, again, going to where these children and families are, the ability for it to be immediately misconstrued about not caring about the situation is what immediately people thought was the message at hand.
Absolutely. And frankly, that message directed toward the media makes absolutely no sense in that context. So, I mean, I don't even understand how it would make sense in a different context, but certainly in that one. And the fact that when she got off the plane, she was not wearing the jacket suggests that somebody got a memo along the flight indicating that this is not playing well.
And I'm sure you've seen the memes of different jackets that had arisen following.
There are many that I want.
Let's move along. Something that happened recently in the realm of media cycles that they tend to go up and down. The red hen.
You know, it's interesting because this administration has really opened up the gates to discussions about free speech and a free press and the First Amendment more broadly. And obviously, Sarah Sanders was asked to leave a restaurant. She wasn't denied service. The whole thing was very civil, right? The owners of this restaurant in Northern Virginia said that they would prefer she not eat there. She got up and left and then took to Twitter and the airwaves and everything else. And I think that this is really interesting because this is just days after the administration did a victory lap again around this general sense that, it's fine for a baker to deny a gay couple being able to make a cake for them for their wedding, that these are free speech issues. But when it comes to political reasons, they're totally not in favor of establishments being able to deny people service. It's also just a week after several members of the Obama administration complained that they can't get dates in Washington, D.C. because people don't like them. My feeling about this is there are consequences to where you work and for whom you work. And in some ways, and certainly in politics, you are judged by the company you keep. So my heart does not go out to Sarah Sanders on this one. And she was not denied the service. If she had been denied the service, I think that would have gone too far. But I think a civil conversation about how maybe this isn't the best place for you isn't to be totally unexpected.
Well, you have to imagine in a realm of a restaurant and workers there, the story was going to come out anyhow. But the fact that she took to Twitter herself, some folks had taken some issue with that as well with her role within the administration.
I think that's right, but I don't really think it's that unexpected. I imagine that they were waiting for something like this to happen because it highlights that they are sometimes, or they feel sometimes that they're victimized as well. So, this is just a perfect example of somebody in the administration being victimized by the liberal establishment. Now, the irony, of course, is not only did she call attention to this restaurant, but by Donald Trump then berating it on Twitter, my bet is that its business is going to be through the roof.
And so keeping an eye on primaries today, what are we watching around the country?
I think New York is the biggest set of cases that are interesting here, two in particular. The first is there are several districts where there are hotly contested Republican primaries. There aren't that many Republican districts left in New York, but the Trump administration has endorsed candidates in several of these, and it'll be a good indicator of whether even in a state like New York, the Republican Party is able to be moved by Donald Trump and his endorsements. The other is that Staten Island race where Michael Grimm, who had, threatened to throw a reporter over the balcony in the Capitol, and was then actually sent to prison, is able to get his old seat back. So we'll see what happens.
Keeping an eye on New York, keeping an eye down in DC, and as always, Jennifer Lawless, appreciate your taking the time to Skype in.
My pleasure.
Okay, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center with our next guest.